We use the sharp sight to save that, and we pull this. Then they have to answer this just to survive our open attack. This week I wanted to do something a little bit different with my videos, and normally if you follow the channel you know that I pick a deck, and it might be something I've brewed, or it might be a meta deck, but maybe it's just something I'm enjoying. Whatever the case may be, I pick a deck, I play a couple games, I share the list with you, you know the drill. This week I wanted to share my Gauntlet run, because since I have come back from my extended hiatus, my break, I've now played in 3 Gauntlet runs, including the one that I'm sharing with you this week. You're gonna have to watch all the videos to see how that one turns out. But my first one back, I hit 6 wins, and then I got to the boss battle. Didn't come up big. I had a bricked hand. I was kind of bummed out about it. Last week I took this exact same lineup that I'm sharing with you from this Gauntlet run, and I did manage to hit Prime Glory. So I thought, you know, I was successful last time. Let's film the games. We'll make that be the videos for this week's YouTube, because a lot of what I do is ladder based, and I haven't covered gauntlets really, and I wanted to talk about lineups and decks and things like that. So that's what we're doing. I'm going to share with you the lineup in this video, but then from today, tomorrow, and the next day, across the next 3 days, it's going to be all 3 decks showcased, because it just worked out that way when I was recording the games. I played each deck once. So let's talk about the lineup, right? I took what I think are versions of the best 3 decks in the game. I say versions of because this Vi list is my guilty pleasure. This realistically should probably be Lee Sin. If I'm being honest, this should be a Felios Lee Sin, but I just consider some form of Targon mid-range to be something in this slot, if you will. So the 3 lists that I have taken for this gauntlet that you're going to be seeing this week are Fiora Shen, Twisted Fate Fizz, and then again, this is my Targon mid-range list, but I really like the Vi variant for a couple of reasons. Now, the reason that I selected this as my lineup both last week and this week is because the way gauntlets work, you go in with 3 decks, both you and your opponent ban a deck, and then out of the decks that are left, you pick a deck and you play 1 game, and then that's how it works. So this isn't like a traditional best of 3 tournament lineup, in which case I think that things change a bit. But I like this lineup because when you know that you are banning a deck, you're still going to see 2. You still want some flexibility in your lineup. So the reason that I take this is because I've got 2 decks that are pretty good against aggro. So even after a ban, if I think that my opponent might be playing aggro, we've got Fiora Shen. And if they ban that, then we have a Targon list that has a lot of access to healing. Now, if they ban Twisted Fate and Fizz, that also gives us a lot of flexibility on which way we want to go as well. And let's be honest, like, we're bringing this because it's ban bait, and if they don't ban it, then we'll just punish them because this deck is bonkers. So you bring this when you might need to go underneath somebody, or when you want to combo out for a win, or honestly, this deck just has a lot of good matchups, and so if they don't ban it, sometimes you just play it because it's that good and it accidentally wins games sometimes. So you bring this as ban bait, or again, this is kind of like your aggressive deck, though it's not traditional aggro, it's kind of more combo-y. And then I really like Fiora Shen, and as I said, this very well could be a Felios Lee Sin. It probably should be. I think that might actually be the superior list, but I really like the Vi version. When I get to the video where I'm talking about this deck list, I'll talk about why I like the Vi version and what kind of decks this is meant to target. But for today's video, since we're starting things out, game 1 of my gauntlet run was a Fiora Shen game, and so I'm going to go ahead and highlight this deck. As always, deck code will be in the video description below, but we're going to go through the list that I had taken for this gauntlet run. So right out of the gate, Green Glade Caretaker, running this as a 3 of because I wanted some early presence. Obviously this scales really well with Shen with your barriers, and it becomes really bonkers if a Bright Steel comes down. And I don't mean Protector, I mean Formation. So also running 3 copies of Bright Steel Protector. Again, nice, very clean early game drop if you really need it against aggressive decks, but it's also just a nice barrier in the mid game. So rounds like 5 or 6 after you've developed your Fiora, maybe your Shen as well, you can, if you're not going to go for your open attack, for example, start with a Bright Steel instead of relying on spending even more mana or something like your Spirit's Refuge, for example. So gives you a lot of opportunities to develop your board, get a cheap barrier. It's just a great card. Still running one Nopify because there's enough cheap spells that this I think is worth your time. Mystic Shots get excited in the TF matchup, for example, for TF Fizz or an Aphelios lineups. You can still hit the moon weapons. Stopping a Crescendum can sometimes be a pretty big deal, so I'm running a 1 of there. 3 Sharp Sight, great combat trick. Obviously Elusive is in the meta. You want to be able to block them. Single combats makes sense. We're running Fiora, but we also have a lot of just mid-range bodies that can make use of it. 3 copies of Fiora along with 2 copies of Protege, because the reality is early on you're probably not doing a lot in your first couple of turns, and so you want to be playing something on 3, usually with a combat trick and mana to back it up. So whether that's Fiora, Protege, or River Shaper, which is huge in this list, you use this as your source of card draw. This deck just doesn't really have a lot of inherent ways to draw cards because you're in Demacia and Ionia, but we're not running Deep Meditation here. It's not that kind of list. So River Shaper in many ways is as important as a Fiora, if not more, because this is how you're going to keep up with some of the other value engines. But Fiora, Protege, River Shaper, again, you're going to see, not a lot of 3 drops here. Some of these look higher, but a lot of these are combat tricks. The reality is the majority of our units are stacked right there. All 8 of those are 3 drops. All right, so at 4, we've got 2 Denies. Still a good card in the meta for a number of reasons. 2 copies of Golden Aegis. I have ran versions of this deck where I'm still running Pursuit over this just because of the mana difference, but right now I like Aegis. Laurent here is another source of card draw. Since we can't run 4 River Shapers, we just run this and accept that it's going to be creating other challengers, but sometimes that's good enough. So this is a nice 1 of, and again, we want to be playing stuff on 3 and potentially on 4 as well, so it's a nice kind of buffer unit there. Shen, premier 4 drop for us. Ideally, if you've got something like a Sharp Sight to protect your Fiora, if you've passed, what you want to be doing is developing Fiora on 3, Shen on 4, and then going into your attacks on 5 with a bunch of combat tricks and mana. That's how you establish your board dominance with this list. I run 3 copies of Spirit's Refuge, or at least I did for this Gauntlet, because I was expecting to potentially run into aggro, and I wanted the lifesteal. Like that's just it. I didn't think that the riposte and the extra attack was going to be as valuable as stabilizing my life total. In the past, I've run this as like, this is a 2 of and 1 riposte, or 2 riposte and 1 refuge, but for this Gauntlet, to give me some extra insurance if I ran into like a triple aggro lineup, I wanted to have access to 3 copies of Refuge. 3 copies of Concerted Strike. It's your best removal tool. I still run Dragons here. I know some people like to run Cythria, or some people like to run Dragons and Cythria with less early game. Like, for example, they might not run Protege, but I just like running Dragon because, again, I just want to fight for the board, and then Bright Steel on the top end. And so this is the Fiora Shen list that I took, and now that I have covered the deck, you're going to go see game 1 of my Gauntlet run where I was playing this list, and let's go do that now. All right, let's just pull the trigger and jump into the first game of this Gauntlet run. Can't wait to see what decks our opponent is thinking about bringing, what ones we get to ban. And this is a pretty standard lineup that we're staring at because it's almost a mirror of our own. And with that being said, I actually think the Fiora Shen is the most annoying here for a number of reasons. This one is, I think, the most polarizing because we don't have a good matchup in the mirror. It's very draw dependent. And if we ended up with our Aphelios Vi list, then we'd be Hush dependent, and we didn't want any of those things. So now we have to decide what we want to play into these, and we're going to take our own Fiora Shen for the same reasons that we banned the opposing one. Now we can still get blown out here if they take their Targan list, and that's what I expect them to play. There it is. Because Boxtopus is a 3-4 while our Fiora is just a natural 3-3. and going a step further, Hush is still potentially problematic. I love Bright Steel in this matchup, but it is not something you want in your opening hand. You want more tools. So this looks okay. This looks reasonable. We really also need to find a River Shaper kind of early on. And the reason for that is because we don't have a lot of inherent or natural card draw, and so the River Shaper will give us the opportunity to try to keep up with Targon. I say try because you can't. Now, naturally, they have the Zoe on one. They always have the Zoe on one, and if they don't, it was going to be a Lunari into a turn 3 Aphelios, but any way you slice it, they're going to have it. We're going to go ahead and take this kind of aggressive opener. Since they went with the Zoe package, we can maybe get underneath them a bit. Now, they could just have a natural box to push here, but otherwise, we'd like to be able to push this. This card is normally really good in certain matchups, but it's not the greatest in this one because there are so many silence effects available. Interesting to note that they got rid of the Zoe option there. But, you know, Targon being Targon, they can get the Celestial silence, they can run Hush, they can do all the things. So what we have to decide now is whether or not we want to use this Sharp Sight. And I think the answer is yes. But the alternative would be to pass, develop our River Shaper, and then go from there. It's actually a bit of a tough call. I think we're going to let this through. I think we're going to let it through. Now, we could develop the River Shaper, but since they did not play a box to push last round, they don't have a great way to do the Aphelios thing here. I actually think we're just going to go with a Fiora. We can save the Sharp Sight and potentially just run into Zoe. I say potentially because they could just have the copy, and so they are going to stun us here. Paddlestar costs 3 though, so I'm a bit curious, yeah, about that play. Sometimes you catch a break. Sometimes your opponent forgets that it's 4 total to deal that 4 with the Zoe combo. And so here we will take our open attack. Like so. We're gonna hold out just to make sure that they don't try something like a Pale Cascade or a Bastion or something like that here, but if they're doing this, I expect a Pale Cascade. You play this first so that the Pale Cascade cycles. Oh, we don't even have to worry about that. Okay. Well, this is a nice exchange for us then. So they find their Aphelios, which you have to assume is going to find a Crescendum so that they can go for that next round. And now we have to decide how we want to tackle that problem. I mean, we have the deny we can use this next round. I think we're still going to stick with our game plan. We want to get a River Shaper down. It's really important for us in this matchup. We also could just let the Boxtopus go. So this is interesting. We have the single combat, but because we went with River Shaper instead of Protege, means we're losing whatever unit. And so I think we'll do this. This way specifically means they have to have a Vigor to survive it. And if they went with a Vigor, then we would answer with a Sharp Sight because they would have the mana as such. We just pass here because we expect them to attempt the Crescendum, and we're going to deny this because this essentially keeps our Fiora alive. We really wish this was our Nopify though. So the interesting thing about Deny is we don't have a lot of great targets in this list, but we could theoretically let this go and then use Sharp Sight to protect our Fiora, but I don't think they would actually take that trade. And doing it this way means that we can still save the Sharp Sight. We get ourselves a good open attack this next round as far as damage, because our win con's not Fiora. With Hush in this lineup, there's just too much that can potentially go wrong. So we'd rather still try to work the body, if you will. Get this damage in, get value from this River Shaper. They go with a Temple. What do we want to do here? Dragon's the safe development because it means our Concerted Strike's a bit more likely to succeed next round. They could have 2 cards cheap enough to trigger Temple this round, but I think this is a Temple and pass for them. Since we took the open attack, it makes sense. The other reason you want to get them low here is because we want to find a rally effect. All right, so Comet is an issue because we've already used our Deny. There's not a lot we can do about that at the moment. Sharp Sight doesn't save us from Meteor at the moment either, but Sharp Sight plus Concerted Strike does. So we're gonna wait and see whether this was a Comet or a Meteor, because Concerted Strike successfully here means she'll level, and then the Sharp Sight puts her at 5 health. So she would survive the 4. They would likely go there and there with their placements, but we have an okay enough board at the moment that we didn't have to overcommit there. Now they still have enough for the Meteor if they really want to, but they don't have enough for a Comet. We could develop the Protector here. But I still think that passing is what we want to do. Okay, so we are going to strike this, and we would like first with Fiora because we'd like to get her the kill if possible, and then the backup will be the Dragon for the Fury. But with them going down to 3, that's below Bastion range. So even if they have a Pale Cascade or a Vigor, the unit dies. It just prevents Fiora from leveling up if they want to do that, but that's a pretty hefty investment just to prevent the level up. I think we'd like to take the spell mana instead of develop here. So even though she's not normally your win con, if we can get her up to 3, it means that they have a lot of work they have to do to play around this. But we want to pull with her as opposed to the Dragon, just because that means the Dragon is threatening a good chunk of damage here. So star shaping and the touch means that we can't threaten lethal with our Sharp Sight the way that we would have liked. Wonder if they're gonna grab a Sharp Sight of their own to try and take our Fiora. They are just gonna let this go. This is very interesting to me. So when you think about spells that we've played this game, we've got Concerted Strike, which is what they likely picked if they're not going for it here. Single Combat, Sharp Sight, maybe Deny. But overall, that's a successful attack for us. We're still drawing cards off our River Shaper. We're still generating damage. We'd love to have a rally effect here. Maybe that's what they took, was a Deny in case we had the rally effect. I think we just let this go. Oh, so we have all of our Spirit's Refuge now.
I'm still good to
So that's a Boxtopus. We're gonna preemptively barrier this, because if they then hush us and try to attack in, we can reapply a barrier. Now, because she's hushed, no win con there, but it keeps her alive. And if honestly, we can just be a thorn in their side for a bit. It's kind of funny.
Nature blesses her followers.
So they get rid of our barrier, we re-barrier. And then we just keep passing through to set ourselves up for a good open attack. We should have dominated this pretty well. And this is exactly why we banned Fiora Shen with our own lineup, because it's very hush dependent. And even when you find it, it's sometimes not enough. That's not to say that Targon can't beat Fiora Shen. It absolutely can. This is a resource engine, and it can grind you out with attrition, but you have to keep River Shapers under control, and you have to hit really good invokes at the right time. So this is a list that can absolutely give us some struggles, but you can see why we did what we did. And I think we just barrier again here, right? Because the 4 is still going here. So I think we do this. I don't think we use the sharp sight to save this, but maybe we do. We use the sharp sight to save that and we pull this, then they have to answer this just to survive our open attack. So actually I have changed my mind. With 1 mana left, they don't have a good way to stop that. So we just keep them both alive. We take our open attack and then we see what they have. And historically, these Targon lists don't have a lot of fast effects.
Nature blesses her followers.
So they shouldn't have many options to deal with this. Yeah, and if it's living legends, they're not going to get any burst speed spells that deal. But they could have had another hush here, and then we still had another riposte, which again doesn't get us the win con with Fiora, but the rest of this is going through. So that's game 1, and that's going to be a nice way to start a gauntlet off. Let's hopefully continue this trend and get ourselves a prime glory.